Well, to take a deep breath, push pause on the conventional wisdom of Silicon Valley and really re-examine the very definition of business success.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into the philosophy and the mechanics of the company of one.
And it's such a vital investigation, because the core thesis of this model is that this idea of perpetual exponential growth, it's not just unnecessary, it's often really harmful to long-term success.
Right. It runs completely counter to everything we're told.
Everything from the marketplace, the media, venture capitalists. So today we're exploring a blueprint for, resilience, autonomy, and maybe most importantly, enjoyment and a richer life through your business.
Instead of sacrificing your life for it.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're just marinated in this idea that growth is the automatic, inevitable sign of success. If a company is good, it has to get bigger.
It's the default assumption. But when you look at institutions that have really perfected their mission, they often deliberately cap their size.
You mean like in the arts or education?
Precisely. Take Oxford University. If it's so successful, why isn't there a branch in Washington, D.C., or, a whole chain of Oxfords across Europe?
Because that would dilute what makes it Oxford. The quality, the culture.
The rigor, the entire structure. The structure is the product. It's the same with a world-class symphony, right? It's designed for, say, 120 musicians. You wouldn't suddenly hire 600 just because you had a profitable season.
It would completely change the sound, the whole function of it.
So the critical question, the one we need to keep asking, is what is growth actually meant to achieve?
And if the goal is stability or high quality for a very specific niche, then chasing more and more volume could actually undermine the whole thing.
That is the defining mindset of the company of one, or CO1. And, it's not necessarily a solo operation. The sources define it as more of a collective mindset, a model where the business actively questions growth.
It's a deliberate choice.
A blueprint for building something lean, agile, and designed for longevity and full ownership. And that translates directly to control over your time and, well, your life.
And just to be clear, this isn't about staying small to, be lazy or avoid paying taxes. The source material is full of individuals and small teams generating 6, even 7 figures a year.
Oh, absolutely. The difference is they're resisting that traditional expansion. They're choosing not to hire, not to lease a bigger office, not to take funding, if any of that compromises their core goals.
But so what's the benchmark for success then if it's not scale?
It's what the sources call the enough principle, which I just find incredibly liberating. It forces you to define your own finish line before you even start running.
Right, like that accountant friend in the story.
Yeah.
The one who's out surfing in August.
Yes. The guy in Tofino who basically tells the author he's done for the year. And he wasn't just, winging it.
He'd done the math.
Meticulously. He figured out the exact profit he needed to cover his entire annual cost of living, plus enough capital to consistently make meaningful investments for his future, retirement, savings, all of it.
And that number became his ceiling.
His ceiling, not his floor. Once he hit it, he knew that any extra work would just be increasing a financial number at the direct expense of his own autonomy.
Which means less time for rock climbing, surfing, family, all the things he actually valued. The moment he hired someone or took on a huge new client, that enough number would shoot up.
And he'd be trading his life for management headaches and more overhead. It's a profound shift, moving your focus from chasing more to achieving optimization and stability, making your work better, not just bigger.
It's an elegant idea. The author boils the whole CO1 model down to a simple formula, kind of like Michael Pollan's food ideology. Start small, define growth, and keep learning.
It's a powerful summary. If you start small and you actually define what enough is for you, then all your learning and iteration can be focused on getting better at that one single defined mission.
We're not aiming for world domination here.
We're aiming for mastery within a stable structure.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Let's get into the operational architecture. What is the actual DNA of these successful small ventures? We've pulled out 4 key pillars from the source material: resilience, autonomy, speed, and simplicity.
And these aren't, soft skills. They are essential survival tools. If you decide to skip the big corporate safety nets, you have to compensate with extreme agility and very deliberate design.
Let's start with resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, which in business can be anything.
Client churn, recessions, market changes, personal setbacks, you name it. And the sources cite this really compelling research from a CEO named Dean Becker. His work found that a person's level of resilience is a way better predictor of their long-term success than education, training, or even experience.
Wow, more than experience.
Far more. And the best part is, it's not some innate talent you're born with. It is absolutely learnable. You can engineer it into your business.
So how do you do that? The sources break it down into 3 learnable characteristics. First up is an acceptance of reality.
Which is really about avoiding wishful thinking. It's the opposite of saying, oh, if only the market was different, or if I just had more capital.
Right. It's about seeing things as they actually are.
Exactly. There's this great little example in the research. If your neighbor starts up a deafening chainsaw while you're trying to work, you can't just wish them away.
No.
The resilient response is to accept the reality, close the window, put on some headphones, and get back to work. You adapt to what you can't control.
And nothing screams brutal reality like that story about Danielle Laporte. This is where you can really see the emotional stakes.
Oh, it's a gut punch. She took $400,000 in funding for her company, but it came with a catch. She had to hire this wonderkin CEO.
Just how she was leveling up.
She thought she was achieving growth. 6 months later, that CEO and the investors fired her from the company that literally had her name on it. They pushed her out, cut her pay. Just imagine that feeling.
Wait, so accepting reality meant letting them fire her. That sounds like giving up, not being resilient.
But that's the pivot. She accepted the difficult reality that outside money means outside control. She didn't let the emotional disaster stop her. Almost instantly, she launched a new website, started consulting to get cash flow, and leveraged her personal brand into a best-selling book.
So the hard lesson was?
Other people's money always comes with other people's opinions about how you should run your life. Accepting that fundamental truth allowed her to break free and thrive on her own terms.
That's a perfect illustration. Okay, the second characteristic is a sense of purpose.
Right. Resilient people are motivated by meaning, by their core values, not just by the bottom line.
Because money isn't a great long-term motivator.
It's a terrible one. It's volatile, and chasing it leads to burnout. But if you have a mission, you're solving a problem, serving an audience you care about, then the inevitable bad day is endurable. You know why you're pushing through it.
And the third one is dark humor, which feels a little out of place in a business discussion.
It does, but it's a vital psychological tool. You see it in high-stress jobs all the time. First responders, trauma surgeons. They use dark humor not to be cruel, but as a cognitive reframing mechanism. It creates psychological distance from the stress.
So it stops them from getting overwhelmed.
It adds a little bit of light to a bad situation, which helps them process it, accept it, and stay resilient enough to keep going. It's an escape hatch.
That sense of control brings us right to the second pillar. Autonomy. The freedom to work around your life, not the other way around.
And autonomy is so powerful that big companies are constantly trying to replicate it. They know if their employees feel ownership and control, they're more ingenious.
Like Google's 20% time.
A prime example. And the result, more than half of all their released products came from that autonomous time. You also see it in these results-only work environments, or ROEs.
Where schedules are flexible, meetings are optional.
And the data is just overwhelming. Productivity goes up, satisfaction soars, turnover drops, all because people are treated like owners, not cogs.
But for an entrepreneur, that autonomy isn't automatic, is it? There's the freelancer trap.
The trap of trading a micromanaging boss for a dozen micromanaging clients who expect you to be on call 24/7. Autonomy has to be earned through mastery of your skill and by building a robust professional network. When you start, you take every job. But as your expertise grows, you earn the right to lead, to set the terms, to choose the clients who respect your boundaries.
Like Caitlin Maude, the digital strategist from the source material.
Her journey maps this out perfectly. She spent 5 years honing her skills at an agency while building her network. So when she went freelance, she didn't just swap one desk for another. She completely re-engineered her day for deep work.
She worked from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., right? Banned meetings during that time.
And found she could get 8 hours of agency work done in 4 hours of focused freelance work.
That's incredible efficiency. But it demands a lot from one person.
It does. And it brings up a crucial requirement for CO1 autonomy. You have to be a generalist, but a very specific kind. A T-shaped professional.
Meaning deep expertise in one area.
Your core skill, writing, coding, whatever. But you also need that broad horizontal skill set in sales, marketing, project management, client retention.
Ah, because that breadth is what keeps you autonomous. You don't need to hire a sales team if you can sell. You maintain control and keep your overhead almost at zero.
Precisely. If you only specialize, you become dependent on others and your autonomy immediately starts to shrink.
And that need for efficiency brings us to the third pillar, speed, which isn't about working frantically.
No, it's about efficiency under constraint. Constraints are the mother of ingenuity. When you take away a resource, like time, you're forced to get creative.
Like Basecamp's 4-day summer work week.
Exactly, they take Fridays off. It forces everyone to figure out how to be just as productive in 4 days as they were in 5. They impose a limit to drive innovation in their workflow.
So speed is about finding smarter ways to work, which creates more free time.
And that efficiency is what allows for quick pivots. A CO1 has very little corporate mass, no bureaucracy, no millions tied up in old infrastructure. So when the market changes, they can turn on a dime.
Stuart Butterfield is the classic example here. Flickr and Slack.
The canonical example? His first 2 games, Game Never Ending and Glitch, were commercial failures. But his teams were small and agile.
They didn't have a lot to lose.
So they could pivot almost instantly. They realized the internal tools they'd built for the games, a photo sharing platform and a team communication tool, were actually the valuable products.
So out of one failure came Flickr, and out of another came Slack, which is now a multi-billion-dollar company.
And the speed of that pivot, made possible by their small size, was the key. We saw Danielle Laporte learn this too. By refusing outside funding, she could move faster. She released a simple first version to get cash flow and then funded the next version with actual profit.
Not with hoped-for VC money.
That's the definition of efficiency under constraint.
And that leads us to the final and maybe most important pillar, simplicity. Playing the long game by avoiding complexity.
Especially at the start, the impulse is to over-engineer everything. You think you need a fancy office, custom logo, bespoke software.
But all of that is just a distraction from the one thing that matters.
Finding and helping a single paying customer. Everything else is a distraction.
The ultimate battle of simplicity versus complexity has to be the pinboard versus Delicious case study.
It's perfect. Delicious had millions in investment, tons of features, 5.3 million users. But it was so complex to manage that they couldn't make it profitable. It just kept getting sold off and declining.
And then there's Pinboard.
Run by one person, Maciej Szydłowski. A super simple paid bookmarking service, no investors, low annual fee. It just worked, simply and reliably. And when Delicious finally collapsed under its own weight.
Pinboard, the simple, resilient company of one, bought its massive, failing competitor for just $35,000.
And migrated all the loyal users. Simplicity just decisively won. The mandate is so clear. Start as simply as possible and question every single new layer of complexity you're tempted to add.
So if this model is so resilient and effective, why does the entire mainstream business world seem so obsessed with this endless, often destructive cycle of expansion?
Right.
Let's get into the systemic pressures and what the sources call the blindness of traditional growth.
The problem is this pervasive cultural assumption that growth is always good, always necessary. This fetishization of more is often rooted in a hollow promise, and statistically, it leads to instability and failure.
The data really backs that up. That Kauffman Foundation and Inc. magazine study, it's chilling. They tracked the 5,000 fastest-growing companies.
And the results were a bloodbath. 5 to 8 years later, more than 2/3 of those high flyers were either out of business, had done mass layoffs, or were sold for less than they were worth.
2/3. That's a shocking number.
Premature scaling. They were spending, hiring, and expanding based on projected revenue, on hope, not on actual current profit. They built the cathedral before they knew if anyone was coming to pray.
Which brings up the role of venture capital. Paul Graham from Y Combinator was pretty blunt about it.
He was. He noted that VCs invest for the astronomical growth of their own portfolios, not always for the long-term health of the company. That pressure often forces companies to become, as he put it, armies of employees who sit around having meetings.
We saw this play out with Buffer, the social media tool.
A painful public example. They got caught up in that Silicon Valley hiring frenzy to please investors. They hired more people than their revenue could actually support.
And even after they secured funding, they were still unstable.
They had to lay off 11% of their team. But to their credit, the leadership learned a critical lesson. They shifted to a much slower, profit-based growth plan. They committed to only hiring when the cash was already in the bank.
Basing growth on reality, not optimism.
And the cost of this uncontrolled growth isn't just financial, it's operational, psychological. Danielle Laporte called her million-dollar website infrastructure the beast.
No, beast.
This complex system that needed a team of engineers and huge maintenance costs. It was this constantly hungry machine that needed exponential growth just to feed itself, and it pulled her focus completely away from her actual creative work.
That's a great metaphor. The system you build becomes perpetually hungry. The Buddhists have a term for this, right? The hungry ghost.
The hungry ghost. The creature with an insatiable appetite, always seeking more profit, more followers, more everything, but never ever reaching satisfaction.
And business history is just littered with companies that were devoured by that ghost. Krispy Kreme.
A classic. Their success was built on novelty and scarcity. But then they chased scale, expanding into grocery stores and gas stations, and it just completely diluted the magic of getting a rare hot donut.
And the sales dropped, but the real damage was deeper, wasn't it?
Yeah. The complexity of that massive size led to them having to settle a $75 million case with the SEC for accounting issues. They were so big and moving so fast they couldn't keep their books straight.
The complexity of growth led directly to ethical failure.
And then, of course, the poster child, Pets.com. They grew based on pure hope. They spent $17 million on advertising in one quarter,
When their revenue was only $8.8 million.
spending almost twice your revenue just on ads. It's madness. They burned through $300 million in investment capital.
The tragic comedy of chasing the hungry ghost.
So the CO1 model champions the opposite, the wisdom of constraint, setting deliberate upper bounds.
Like Southwest Airlines in 1996.
It's a great story. They were incredibly successful. Over 100 cities were begging for their service, but they turned down over 95% of those offers. They chose only 4 new locations.
They weren't anti-growth, they were anti-stupid growth. They established a safety margin, a pace that protected their culture and their quality.
Which flies in the face of our basic evolutionary wiring to just accumulate without limit. But in modern business, that wiring often leads us right off a cliff.
So it's about shifting that internal framework. Which brings us to the mindset shifts required to actually pull this off. It's not just business structure, it's psychology.
Absolutely. And it starts with getting the relationship between purpose and passion right.
The follow your passion mantra.
It's often flawed and, frankly, irresponsible advice. It implies the sense of entitlement to enjoyable, well-paid work right from the start.
And the jobs just aren't there. That study of college students found their passions were in sports, arts, music.
Fields that make up only 3% of available jobs. If everyone followed their passion, 97% of us would be miserable or unemployed.
So what's the alternative?
The counter-argument from thinkers like Cal Newport is that passion is actually the side effect of mastery. It doesn't come before the work, it comes after the hard work, after you become competent and develop a unique skill.
Like Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank.
Perfect example. She didn't start out passionate about real estate. She was waiting tables. She got into it, worked incredibly hard, became a master at it, and then the passion followed.
So for a CO1, the focus is on the craftsperson mindset. What can you competently offer the world?
Exactly. It reframes the whole question. And that leads directly to tackling the disease of busyness or hustle culture.
The idea that working longer and harder automatically equals more success.
And the research just debunks it completely. The psychologist Wayne Oates, who coined the term workaholism, found that hustlers do not outperform non-hustlers. The only measurable impacts were higher stress, more work-life conflict, and worse health.
And this hustle culture pushes us into the myth of multitasking. I was amazed to learn that the word priority used to be singular.
It was until the 1950s. And now we know that multitasking is a cognitive disaster. It can reduce your productivity by up to 40%. That Hewlett-Packard study is terrifying.
But what about interruptions reducing your IQ?
By over 10 points. That is twice the cognitive impairment of smoking marijuana. Interruptions are literally making us dumber at our jobs.
So the successful CO1 has to be just maniacal about protecting focus.
Absolutely. The researcher Gloria Mark found it takes, on average, 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back to a task after you've been interrupted.
That 23-minute tax is what kills a day.
It's why Jason Fried at Basecamp sees it as his core job to protect his team's time. They even ban shared calendars, so people can't just assume a blank spot is free time for a meeting. That blank space is for deep work.
So for you, the listener, The advice is to do a personal productivity audit.
For 2 weeks, just track everything, your tasks, how long they take, and every single distraction. Then you create a stop doing list. It's about fighting back against the default setting of constant distraction.
So a CO1 competes on intelligence and efficiency, not on volume, which brings us to how they compete without scale.
Yeah.
The competitive advantage of personality and trust.
Right. Since you can't compete on mass, you have to compete on character. Big companies aim to be universally acceptable. They are vanilla ice cream.
They can't risk offending anyone, so they end up being bland.
But for a CO1, blandness is death. You have to be pistachio ice cream. Polarizing, unique, and deeply loved by a dedicated group of fans who will happily pay a premium for what you offer.
Which means leaning into what makes you unique.
It relies on creating fascination, intense captivation. You achieve that by leaning into your innate personality traits, being the awkward, excitable nerd or whatever it is, and turning that authenticity into a competitive advantage.
The power of polarization.
If you try to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. You have to proudly exclude people. Marmite's tagline is the gold standard. You either love it or hate it.
And that polarization can actually disrupt giants. The story of Just Mayo is a fantastic case study.
By being proudly eggless, they were instantly polarizing. Their competitors, like Unilever, sued them. The American Egg Board was caught conspiring against them, but all that controversy
It was just free, powerful marketing.
it made the brand more desirable to its core audience. Unilever eventually had to drop the lawsuit and, in a huge reversal, launched their own vegan mayo to compete. The small polarizing company forced the giant to change.
Because you can't replicate personality.
You can't. Which brings us to the other side of this. Making customer success your primary form of marketing.
Because retention is everything.
Loyal customers are worth up to 10 times as much as their first purchase. And referrals build trust by proxy. We know 92% of consumers trust a recommendation from a friend over any ad.
That's a huge time and money saver. Freelance writer Joel Kletke says 80–90% of his good leads are word of mouth. They come pre-sold.
And you get those referrals by helping your customers succeed. MIT's Eric von Hippel found that over 60% of profitable innovations come from lead users, your most advanced customers. You don't need a huge R&D team, you just need to listen to them.
It's about going the extra mile. Like UGG the clothing line. If an order is wrong, they ship a new shirt immediately, no questions asked, don't even ask for the old one back.
That obsession earns free publicity and turns customers into advocates, but you have to stay true to the values that attracted them.
Which brings up the danger of misalignment. The Daiya Foods incident.
A perfect, painful example. A huge vegan food company gets sold to a pharmaceutical giant, Otsuka, that tests on animals.
And their loyal, value-driven vegan customer base revolted.
Widespread boycotts, petitions. It was a disaster. By chasing growth through the sale, Daiya ignored the core ethical values of its customers, and the business suffered immediately and significantly.
Customer happiness and value alignment really are the new marketing. Okay, we've covered the philosophy and the mindset. Let's get into the mechanics, the practical steps for launching and operationalizing the CO1.
Right, let's get into the weeds. It has to start with the minimum viable profit, or MVPR, and this is a necessary calculation, not just a concept.
So MVPR is the exact amount of profit needed to cover your salary and costs so the business is stable full-time. How do you actually calculate that?
You have to be ruthless. First, your fixed costs. Software, insurance, things that don't change. Second, your variable costs. Things tied directly to a sale, like materials or processing fees. And third, your target owner salary. What you actually need to live.
So MVPR equals fixed costs plus variable costs plus your salary.
Exactly. And then based on your price, you know the absolute minimum you need to sell to make it work. The goal is profitability right out of the gate. If your idea needs a ton of capital to hit that number, it's too big. Scale it down.
And the first launch is always just a guess.
Always. Jim Collins' research showed great companies start as good enough to launch. They follow the hedgehog concept. Find that intersection of what you're passionate about, what you can be the best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine. And launch with that one core thing.
Like the author's own course, Creative Class. He resisted the urge to spend a year building 30 lessons in custom software.
Which would have been a deadly trap. Instead, he launched in 1 month with 7 lessons, using cheap existing software. It made money quickly and, crucially, let him iterate based on feedback from real, paying customers.
And for funding, the CO1 model often favors crowdfunding over VCs.
It allows you to test the market and raise capital without giving up control. Catherine Krug, CEO of BetterBack, raised over $3 million that way and actually turned down a Shark Tank deal because she didn't need it. Crowdfunding fills that void for smaller, profitable companies that VCs often ignore.
Okay, so once you hit MVPR, the key to staying lean is scalable systems, using technology as a force multiplier.
This is how it's possible today. Peter Levels, who runs Nomad List, earns over $400,000 a year with no employees. He relies on software, APIs, and contractors.
You can run a business today with a laptop that used to require a team of 5 people.
And automation can actually increase connection. Brennan Dunn uses email automation to create these personalized funnels that educate customers, reduce support requests, and drive sales, all while he's asleep.
You also have to scale down collaboration. Focused, time-bound, and intensive.
Like a hackathon. The one that created Facebook's like button is a great example. You get a team focused on one goal, they solve it quickly, and then they go back to their deep, uninterrupted work.
And finally, the essential financial and legal setup, starting with that mantra: overhead, death.
You have to question every single expense. Is it easier to find 5 new clients to pay for the software, or is it easier to just raise your rates for the 3 clients you already have?
And legally, setting up an LLC or corporation is not optional.
It's essential for personal liability protection. Get a lawyer on retainer who understands your specific business online revenue, international clients, all of that.
And your accountant needs to be an advisor, not just a tax preparer.
Someone who understands the CO1 model and can save you more money than they charge by making sure you're structured correctly.
And finally, the runway buffer.
You have to set a stable salary for yourself based on your average profit, and you must have 3 to 6 months of liquid savings before you go full-time. That buffer is what provides the choice and freedom at the heart of this entire model. It's what lets you say no to a toxic client without panicking.
That brings us to our final synthesis. We've explored a model that defines success not by scale, but by quality, resilience, and personal control. The CO1 model is really a resistance movement against the default settings of modern business.
And we see the immense historical cost of ignoring that. Look at Kongrugumi, a Japanese construction company. It survived wars, political crises, everything.
Right.
For 1,428 years, one of the oldest companies in the world.
That is staggering. What finally brought them down?
The 1980s financial boom. They succumbed to the pressure to expand, they moved into real estate, over-leveraged themselves, and chased growth that compromised their core stability. It led to $343 million in debt, and they were liquidated.
A 1,400-year history ended because they chased the hungry ghost.
So the ultimate goal of a company of one, then, is determining what is truly enough. And reaching that calculated point is profoundly liberating. It's the freedom to say no, the freedom to focus only on the work and the people you genuinely enjoy.
It's not about staying static, but about constantly learning and adapting within those strategic upper bounds.
So for you, the listener, here's a final provocative thought. We talked about Buffer's approach, focusing on increasing ownership and scope of influence for employees rather than forcing them into management. If perpetual growth and climbing the ladder aren't the ultimate goals, how can you redefine success in your own role or business by going deeper?
By becoming the absolute master of your current expertise, rather than feeling forced to climb a traditional, often unwanted ladder.
Rather than chasing the title, chase the true mastery.